afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum, things I'd like to see. And today I've sort of got a, slightly different topic in mind. I'm thinking tank crews specifically. A rule, an improved system that what we currently have, which basically just encompasses more or less only the Americans, but rather something that encompasses in the future coming years, because I'm not entirely sure we can expect to see it here in the coming soon. Theory, it could see it happen, but I'm not counting on it. But, again, I'm going to use companies 2 as the example based on sort of how to see it implemented. Specifically, again, you sort of got the current system with the Americans. They can pop up, they can repair it, you can sort of switch crews between tanks, though no one uses that really, not even me. I'll probably do more of that. They, of course, can repair and so other bits. It's a pretty sizable advantage there to the Americans. Again, it does add some elements to them. Of course, at the same time, it does require they pretty much have to pop crews into anything. So that also creates some or slightly sort of fun intended or unintended consequences. Plus, we also have the bit there with abandoned tanks, which is, is a bit, iffy for a lot of people because it does feel awfully random. So, what I'm thinking of with the new improved crew system, or at least the one I'd like to see, is, something that, gives something to all faction. Again, crew system sort of brings, abandonment under to, more control, but also I think, at least in my opinion, tries to then sort of recreate some of the same elements you get with infantry, specifically, unit preservation to a slightly larger degree, but more centered around the crew of the tank, since essentially those are the chaps that actually matter. And the tank itself, of course, is important, particularly the Germans, but, otherwise, in most cases, if the crew survive, they usually just pop into another tank. And the game doesn't quite as much reflect that very well. And, for example, the Americans will end up with a lot of times, spare crews standing about, which is admittedly a bit awkward, Why aren't they just calling a replacement? Oh, right, because they can't. So that's sort of what I'll try and cover here. But initially, again, we're giving all, say 4 armies here, tank crews, we need to differentiate them a bit there. We need to sort of make them stand out. We need to sort of ensure it's not just all the same, because ours is going to be a bit boring. So that means, different crews will have different advantages. German crews, for example, would overall probably be better infantrymen as well, since, German tank crews were quite commonly forced into the role of infantry due to a lack of tanks. So in that sense, they'd be overall better fighters with a little MG-34 as well, since, they actually had a kit for converting their coaxial machine gun, for example, into a machine gun. So that sort of be fitting in there. Russian crews, on the other hand, will actually be able to get replacement tanks faster. I'll get into replacement tanks later on, but that's sort of how I see it now. Part of me thought, let's make it harder for them to get out of the tanks, because, that'd be really fun. Unless you're the guy who has it, in which case, oh right, that sounds silly, so I dropped it. But basically, they have better chance of just getting replacement equipment because, they have a lot of T-34s, this is common. So again, they can just sort of roll in another one quickly. So in that sense, Russian tanks are just, even easier to replace than just getting. For the Americans, I'd imagine just getting out of the tank faster overall, since, they really had a lot of sort of things to sort of make for better survivability compared to Soviets. The crew hatches, for example, are easily spring-loaded, so they could just pop out and get out. So, for example, for the American crews, getting out of a tank would be a lot easier than, say, any other tanks. That's rather how it sort of fits in the bill there, just higher degree of survivability for American crews. Hell, they, used everything that's sort of trying to sort of help with that, so, they wouldn't get killed right away. So, in that sense, I suppose that fits the bill there. For the British, well, that's one a bit more tricky there. You sort of could say the crew could take on more damage because they didn't use crash helmets. The problem is it's Germans, so that seems a bit, I don't know, just a bit unfair. But, I suppose, and also, again, it's not really much of a fun thing. You need something that distinguishes them in a more positive manner. At which point, the only thing you sort of think of is they tend to be a bit more like cavalry, like, sticking their heads out and sort of, poking about. So I suppose just overall better line of sight, crew that at the same time exposes itself a bit more, but overall, they do keep, overall better view around in their tanks. So that's rather how I sort of view it there as the British. So in that way, we sort of got a baseline there. Again, there's differences between the 4 armies, but again, overall, they can crew tanks, fight as infantry, grab territory as well, and also even fix the tank. So again, it's going to be rudimentary repairs. So that, for example, all of a sudden, all 4 or 5 armies, can do a lot more than it previously could. But at the same time, there's still a lot of elements to look into. For example, what am I talking about when I'm talking replacement tanks? Well, say, for example, I have this dude looking really bad. I pop out the crew. Stu gets knocked out. Right, I stand there. I got a crew. Again, that's also a common situation with the Americans. You got a crew, and well, you can't do anything with it. I mean, it's there to fight as infantry, but what now? Well, in that case, you'd call in a replacement tank or replacement Stug, which would then, of course, be called up, at the base. You'd then have the crew pop back and get into it and sort of drive on. It would be at a slightly reduced cost compared to the tank. In fact, you can even say, the Germans perhaps should pay a bit more to sort of reflect it further. But again, this becomes, is that fun and so on there. But again, you could perhaps do it with some of the more expensive tanks, for example, calling armor and so on there, for example, just using these, just quickly get in a Tiger, for example. Then you could also apply that to other armies. But something like that, for example, again, oh, hey, right, again, lost Stug, but the crew is still alive. I then replace the Stug, and there I go, of course, to prevent abuse, because that's easily, one way, just, pop it out, call a new tank, pop it out. Because at the same time, such a system will also require, infantry couldn't pop in to drive it. You then have to require crews, which means, you actually select one, call in a crew, for example. You say, your force abandon a tank, inside your territory, you can secure it. Right then you also need to get it crewed, so you call it a tank crew. And of course, in that sense, we'd also require a slightly different system there. But overall replacements, and again, the tank needs to be wrecked before it can actually call in replacement tanks. Otherwise, again, the system is open to abuse. In that sense, they need to tie, the tank to the crew. Tank gone, crew can call in another tank. Tank still there, they can't call up another tank. So that's, for example, a little something there as well. But again, all of a sudden, management of crews, beyond just, having them there would sort of be a bit more important. You'd also then be more encouraging to try and at least save the crew and not just the bloody tank. For example, it gets immobilized, but oh dear, at least I can save the crew. Right, so all of a sudden there, we're slightly changing things up. Again, abandonment of tanks becomes more common. So again, the whole abandonment scheme becomes more there. But at the same time, what about the tanks that have been, abandoned? How do we secure them? Because right now it's just a race to them. But rather than imagine, it's about map control. Whoever then controls the part of the map where the tank's abandoned can then call in a replacement crew. So again, all of a sudden, the fight for the territory as well doesn't just encompass the resources, but any abandoned vehicles as well, which you can then call in crews on. All of a sudden, things change out a bit further. All right. Perhaps not the most advanced system, but, I think it'd work out overall. And, had some elements to it. I briefly thought about having then recovery tanks that can then sort of tow tanks into your territory. I mean, it's an option, but just, not entirely sure if it's viable. They can also have the recovery tanks be really good at then repairing tanks as well. So, I mean, that is an option as well, not something I'm sort of really pursuing. So, again, just with these sort of small additions, or perhaps bigger additions, all of a sudden, again, there's more of a unit preservation aspect around tank crews, which again, ensures overall armor forces can become a bit more, sizable still, and for example, some factions won't be too badly hurt by suffering it by having weaker tanks, like say, the Soviets. All of a sudden, again, things, slightly balance each other out in slightly different ways again, and perhaps also get a bit more interesting. And again, the abandonment system, suddenly feels a lot more organic and less out of control of your hands, but there's going to be then a further element because certain attacks can then sort of further damage the crews. Specifically, say, heat rounds. Because then, have a chance of, damaging crew. If the crew suffers enough damage, dead crew. But there'd also be another factor. That's based on the size of the tank. Medium tanks versus medium equipment, no problem. Light tank, on the other hand, say, being engaged per Stug, going to suffer crew damage because it's overall a much larger shell than it's built to support. Similarly, Tiger tank, a lot more damage in light tanks, but otherwise, more crew damage on medium tanks. All of a sudden, again, there's suddenly another hierarchy there added between light, medium, and heavy. And again, there's still an abandonment system, but again, it's more controlled. And again, less random. And again, overall more organic. It sort of follows the flow of the battle rather than something that just, happen. Good lord, my tank got abandoned. Rather, it's now, good lord, my crew got killed. This is pretty bad, but it's not RNG. Right? So again, we can sort of add something there and, at the same time, keep it within the control of the players. So in that sense, again, all of a sudden, we've done a lot more there. Again, we're given all crews a bit more to work with, made it more interesting, made it, more viable. And again, just fun to play with. And all of a sudden, perhaps just, made it more worth it. And again, added, suddenly a much more deeper element to armor. But at the same time, I ask yourself, well, still, what's the reason, for me to preserve it? Because at the same time, the bonuses might not be that much in some of the vehicles, Why would I want to save that crew, for example? Well, of course, that's a bit the interesting question. Why? Well, probably in that sense, they might also want to look into further, adding some, more serious veterans rather than just, stat boosts like, rate of fire and armor and so on. They perhaps add a bit more sort of customization within, the veterans as well, though I'm rather still thinking about a much bigger video and sort of veterancy overall, but for example, sort of more specific abilities, something that creates a bit more personality for the crew. So you also that want to preserve them better. For example, more, like improvised armor, sort of more generally around, the tank crew, throws a bit on here for the Germans, of course, armored skirts, but also, just sandbags on the front, treads and the likes there. All of a sudden, again, a bit there. It could be, access to heat rounds, so the more general ability, or some other kind of armor-piercing round. And you could even imagine, some kind of ace level, which only one tank gets into. But again, I'd probably sort of get into that in a sort of later video, sort of more specifically discussing that and just really thinking about it and how to sort of, get that to sort of work. But again, a bit more sort of, meaty and customizable veterans again for the tanks, but then further, make it desirable to preserve the crew. Again, you sort of got a really specific crew, which is really good, and again, can do something really good. Again, all of a sudden, you want to preserve it more than you otherwise would. So that rather, I think, sort of covers the system I'm sort of imagining for armor. Again, vehicle crews, or tank crews specifically. I don't think we sort of see the same for vehicles, particularly since some of them just are like 2 men or something like that, so that might be a bit much. But again, for light tanks, medium tanks, assault guns, tank destroyers, of course, heavy armor. Again, all of a sudden there'd be a lot more there, all factions with a bit more to play around with. Again, another element of unit preservation, but again, something that's more desirable rather than forced. Abandonment turned into something rather not RNG, but more into, again, a controllable organic element. Which overall, I think, will series of desirable goals, which will be a lot of fun, for people to play around with. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that, I think, rather covers it. I hope you liked it. Hopefully you found it entertaining and interesting and would like to see it. Which, of course, like, subscribe, share, and, of course, tell Rick you'd really like to see this in a future Company News game. Again, I'm not entirely sure if we're going to see this in a Company News 2. I mean, it's doable to a certain extent. Doable, but they probably had to at least make some of the more veterans here in the tanks a bit more, unique in some cases. But, yeah, again, doable. So there you go again. Hope you liked it and so on there. And if you did, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell Relic. And hope to see you another time for another video about something else I'd like to see in future Company of Heroes. This is Imperial Dane signing off, and see you all. Cheers.